At first, I found a strange box in our basement. Then there was my wife's puzzling behavior. And finally, everything fell into place. I brought them to their knees and made them swallow. But what happened after that made my blood run cold. In the end, I closed him. Hi everyone. I'm posting here because I need advice. And honestly, I just need to get this off my chest. My name's Chris, 35M. And I've been married to my wife, Jessica, 34F, for 7 years. I thought we had a good marriage, a great one, even. Sure, there were ups and downs, but who doesn't have those, right? We met at a charity event where she was volunteering. Jessica was the kind of woman who lit up a room. Smart, funny, beautiful. We dated for 3 years before tying the knot. I was head over heels, and for a long time I thought she was too. Fast forward to now. We live in a cozy suburban neighborhood with neighbors we know by name and a dog that we both adore. Everything seemed normal, boring even. But I liked boring. Boring meant stability, safety, love. At least that's what I thought. Looking back, the signs were there, but I was too blind to see them. Over the past few months, Jessica started acting different. She was on her phone more often, laughing at texts she wouldn't share, and stepping out for random errands that lasted hours. When I asked, she'd brush it off with a smile and say, "Oh, just catching up with old friends." Then there were the late-night meetings. Jessica worked as a freelance event planner, so her hours were irregular, but it felt like these meetings popped up more often than usual. I didn't question it because, well, I trusted her. I didn't even think twice when she said she was networking at a neighborhood book club every other Friday. I wasn't exactly thrilled about her spending more time out, but I figured she needed it. The real shift came about a week ago. I was cleaning out the basement. Jessica never goes down there, and stumbled across a box I hadn't seen before. It was sealed tightly and labeled Project. Now, Jessica's a bit of a pack rat, so I assumed it was old work stuff. Curiosity got the better of me, though, and I opened it. Inside were stacks of envelopes with handwritten notes. Some signed, others anonymous. But the content wasn't about work. They were explicit. Very explicit. Some described encounters that made my stomach turn. Others contained crude sketches and directions to places I didn't recognize. At the bottom of the box was a burner phone wrapped in a scarf I'd never seen her wear. At that moment, I felt my world tilt on its axis. My heart raced, my hands shook, and I broke out in a cold sweat. I couldn't believe what I was holding. This wasn't just infidelity. It was something darker, something calculated. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, looking down into an abyss I didn't want to fall into. I put everything back and sat in the basement for what felt like hours. Questions swirled in my head. What was going on? Who were these people? And most importantly, who the hell was my wife? I knew I couldn't confront her, not yet. If I wanted the truth, I needed a plan. After that night in the basement, my mind wouldn't rest. Every time I looked at Jessica, I felt like I was staring at a stranger. She'd laugh, kiss my cheek, and go about her day like everything was normal. Meanwhile, I was stuck trying to figure out how the woman I'd built my life with could be hiding. Whatever this was, I needed answers, but I also needed proof. The burner phone was my first target. That night, after Jessica went to bed, I tiptoed back down to the basement and grabbed it. My hands shook as I turned it on, praying it didn't make any noise. Thankfully, it didn't. The phone had a passcode. Of course, it did. I tried a few obvious options, her birthday, our anniversary, but nothing worked. Frustrated, I almost put it back when something clicked in my brain. Jessica had a favorite number, 14. She always used it for little things like locker codes or when she needed to pick a password on the fly. I typed in 1414. The screen unlocked. The home screen was bare with only a handful of apps. But the messages, there were hundreds of them. I opened the most recent thread, and my stomach dropped. The messages weren't just flirty. They were explicit, describing things she wanted to do or had already done. The name on the thread read Phoenix, but it was clear this wasn't their real name. The text talked about meeting spots, the park bench by the fountain, the alley behind the cafe, your basement, my basement. I almost threw the phone across the room. They'd been here, in my house, I scrolled further, finding messages from other names: Shadow, Angel, Raven. Each thread told a similar story. Meetups, explicit conversations, and sometimes even photos. The realization hit me like a freight train. Jessica wasn't cheating with one person. She was meeting multiple people all under my nose, and some of these encounters had happened in my own home. I needed to dig deeper. I opened the photos folder, and there they were, pictures of Jessica with men and women I didn't recognize. Some were innocent enough, like selfies, but others were graphic. Each image was like a knife to the gut. I put the phone back exactly as I'd found it and went back upstairs, my mind racing. Jessica stirred in her sleep as I climbed into bed beside her. For a moment, I considered waking her up, screaming at her, demanding answers. But I stopped myself. I needed more information before I confronted her. I wasn't about to walk into this blind. The next morning, Jessica was her usual self, sipping coffee and scrolling through her laptop. She looked up and smiled at me. "Morning, babe. You okay? You look tired." Tired? I was exhausted, but I forced a smile and shrugged it off. Just didn't sleep well. She bought it, of course. Why wouldn't she? I'd always been the trusting, oblivious husband. That day, I started my own investigation. I checked her laptop while she was out running errands. No suspicious emails, but there was a hidden folder buried in her files. It required a password, so I saved it for later. I also checked our shared bank account. No major red flags, but there were multiple cash withdrawals over the past few months, nothing massive, just small amounts that added up. Later, I casually asked about her plans for the weekend. She mentioned the neighborhood book club again, that same lame excuse she'd been using for months. I smiled and nodded like an idiot, already planning to follow her. That Friday, I installed a tracker app on her phone while she showered. It was risky, but at this point I had nothing to lose. If she was going to her so-called book club, I'd know exactly where she went. What I found out would change everything. Friday night came, and Jessica left the house around 7 p.m., holding her tote bag and dressed like she was headed to an ordinary book club. "Don't wait up," she said, kissing me on the cheek. Her perfume lingered after she walked out the door. The moment her car pulled out of the driveway, I grabbed my phone and opened the tracker app. The little dot marked Jessica moved down the street, then turned onto the main road. My heart raced as I threw on a jacket, grabbed my keys, and slipped into my car. I stayed a few blocks behind, careful not to get too close. She didn't go to the community center where the book club was supposed to meet. Instead, she drove across town to a strip of industrial buildings, run-down warehouses with flickering streetlights and graffiti-covered walls. She parked behind one of the buildings, and my chest tightened as I watched her get out of the car and walk toward a door with a dim red light above it. This wasn't just a random spot. She knew exactly where she was going. I waited in my car for a few minutes, debating what to do. My instinct told me to barge in and demand answers, but I stopped myself. I couldn't risk her seeing me, not yet. So I got out of the car, locked it, and crept toward the building. The door she'd gone through wasn't locked, so I slipped inside and found myself in a dimly lit hallway. Music thumped faintly in the distance, and muffled voices came from somewhere nearby. I followed the sound, keeping to the shadows until I reached another door. It was slightly ajar, and I could see into the room. My stomach turned at what I saw. Jessica wasn't sitting with a group of neighbors discussing the latest bestseller. She was surrounded by a circle of strangers, laughing and drinking. It looked like some kind of underground club, but not the innocent kind. People were paired off, some in private corners, others out in the open. The air was thick with tension, and it didn't take long to realize what kind of gathering this was. My wife was part of an exclusive sex group, right here in our city. Jessica sat in the center, chatting with a man I'd never seen before. He was tall, muscular, and dressed in expensive clothes. Someone who stood out in a place like this. He leaned in close, whispering something that made her laugh. My hands clenched into fists as I watched her flirt shamelessly, her wedding ring glinting under the dim light. I stayed there for what felt like an eternity, frozen in place. She touched his arm, then his leg, and finally got up, leading him toward another room. My body tensed, every nerve screaming at me to stop her, but I couldn't move. Instead, I backed out of the hallway and left the building. I got in my car, slammed the door, and sat there, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly they hurt. Couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. This wasn't just infidelity, it was a double life. She had an entire secret world I knew nothing about, filled with people I'd never met and places I'd never been. And she was bold enough to carry it out like it was nothing, like I didn't exist. But now I knew. Driving home that night, I didn't feel anger or sadness. I felt cold, calculating. Whatever was coming next, it was time for Jessica to learn that actions have consequences. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the couch, staring at the blank TV screen, my mind racing. Every little change in Jessica's behavior now made sense. The sudden errands, the late-night meetings, her lack of interest in me. This wasn't just cheating. It was a lifestyle. The question was, how long had it been going on? I woke up the next morning with one mission: find out everything. Jessica was still asleep upstairs, blissfully unaware of what I'd seen the night before. I made coffee, drank half a cup, and then went straight back to the basement. The burner phone was still there, right where I'd left it. I unlocked it again and dug deeper. The texts with Phoenix were bad. But what really set my blood boiling was a group chat named The Circle. It was full of people, dozens of them, discussing their latest escapades, planning meetups, and sharing explicit photos. I spotted Jessica's name, or rather her alias, Starfire. Her messages painted a picture of someone I didn't recognize. She bragged about her adventures, gave detailed reviews of her encounters, and even shared tips for sneaking around without getting caught. But it wasn't just about sex. She was helping organize the meetups, suggesting locations, and coordinating schedules. My wife wasn't just a participant. She was a leader. One message stood out among the rest. Starfire. Let's use the basement again next week. The safe and Chris is clueless. He'll be at work. I slammed the phone down, my heart pounding. They'd used our house. My house. My sanctuary had been turned into their playground, and I hadn't even known. I couldn't let this slide. Not anymore. Over the next few days, I played the part of the oblivious husband. I smiled, laughed at Jessica's jokes, and even suggested we have a date night. She agreed, probably thinking everything was normal. But in the back of my mind, I was already planning my next move. I set up cameras around the house. Hidden ones, discreet enough that Jessica wouldn't notice. One in the living room, another in the kitchen, and, of course, one in the basement. If they were going to use my house again, I'd have proof this time. I also started documenting everything. Bank transactions, her sudden trips, and the burner phone's contents. I even went through our shared laptop and managed to crack the password on that hidden folder. It was full of videos. I forced myself to watch, even though it felt like my heart was being ripped out of my chest. Some of them were filmed in hotel rooms, others in cars. But the worst ones were taken in our basement. The timestamps matched days I'd been at work or away visiting family. In one of the videos, she was with the man from the underground club, the tall one who had whispered to her. His face was clear as day, and I made a mental note to find out who he was. I downloaded everything onto a secure drive and kept it hidden. If Jessica thought she'd gotten away with it, she was dead wrong. 2 days later, I got the alert I'd been waiting for. The tracker app on Jessica's phone showed her heading to another meetup, this time at a fancy hotel downtown. I followed her there, parking a few blocks away and watching from a distance. She walked into the hotel lobby, holding hands with the same man from the video. They looked so comfortable, so casual, like they'd done this 100 times before. I didn't follow them inside. I didn't need to. The cameras and the tracker had given me more than enough. When she came home that night, I was sitting at the kitchen table, pretending to work on my laptop. She kissed me on the cheek and asked how my day was, her tone light and cheerful. I smiled back, playing the fool one last time. It was fine, I said. How was the book club? She froze for just a second, so quick I almost missed it, then smiled. Good. We're reading a classic this month. Should be interesting. Classic. right? I sipped my coffee and nodded. Can't wait to hear all about it. Inside, I was seething. It was time to put my plan into action. That night, as Jessica slept soundly beside me, I made another critical decision. I couldn't do this alone. If I wanted my revenge to hit hard and ensure she couldn't wiggle her way out of it, I needed help. And I knew exactly who to call. The next morning, I reached out to Matt, my best friend since college. He was the kind of guy who'd drop everything if you needed him, and I trusted him more than anyone. When I called, he answered on the second ring.
Hey, man.
What's up? You sound weird. I hesitated for a second, then let it all out, the messages, the videos, the meetups, everything. I didn't sugarcoat it. By the time I finished, Matt was silent, and I could hear him breathing heavily on the other end. Chris, he finally said, his voice low. This is messed up. She used your house. Yeah, I said, my throat tight. She's got some nerve. What do you need from me? Help me figure this out. I've got proof, but I want to hit her where it hurts. Publicly, legally, everything. She needs to know she messed with the wrong guy. Matt was quiet for a moment, then said, all right, let's do it. Come over tonight and we'll plan. I spent the rest of the day pretending everything was fine while Jessica went about her routine. Around 7 p.m., I told her I was meeting Matt for drinks, and she didn't even bat an eye. Have fun, she chirped, completely oblivious. At Matt's place, we went over everything, the burner phone, the tracker app, the videos, and the messages. Matt was horrified by the level of betrayal. She's running this like some kind of business, he said, shaking his head. Exactly, I said. And I want her to lose everything, her reputation, her comfort, her ability to hide behind lies. She doesn't get to walk away from this unscathed. We mapped out a plan. The first step was gathering even more evidence, especially on the people involved in the group. If this blew up, I wanted them exposed, too. Matt suggested digging into the identity of the man Jessica had been seeing most frequently, the tall guy from the videos and the hotel. He seems like a key player, Matt said. If we can find out who he is, we can connect more dots. Good idea, I said. I'll start digging tomorrow. The second step was legal. I'd already been documenting everything, but Matt knew a ruthless divorce lawyer who specialized in cases like mine. She'll make sure Jessica doesn't walk away with a dime, Matt said. And if we can tie this to the group's activities, who knows? We might even get law enforcement involved. I nodded, feeling a spark of hope for the first time. Finally, the third step was public exposure. This wasn't just about Jessica, it was about everyone in that group. I wanted to blow the lid off their entire operation. We discussed releasing the evidence anonymously, making sure it reached the right people without pointing back to me directly. By the time I left Matt's place, I had a clear path forward. The next day, while Jessica was out, I dug deeper into the man from the videos. Using a reverse image search on a screenshot from one of the recordings, I found his social media profile. His name was David, and he wasn't just some random guy, he was a well-known real estate developer in the city. Married, 2 kids. This was the leverage I needed. If David was involved in Jessica's secret life, chances were good he had as much to lose as she did. I called Matt immediately. Guess what? I said. I found him. His name's David, and he's married. Matt whistled low. Man, this just keeps getting worse. You gonna contact his wife? Not yet, I said, but I'm keeping that card in my pocket. With David's identity in hand, I started building a timeline of his interactions with Jessica. Between the burner phone messages and the tracker app, it was easy to piece together their secret meetups. It was almost laughable how brazen they'd been. By the time Jessica came home that evening, I had enough dirt to bury her and her lover. But this was just the beginning. With David's identity in hand, I decided it was time to make my first move. I wasn't going to confront Jessica yet. No, the first domino to fall would be her lover. If I could rattle his cage, I might learn even more. The next day, while Jessica was out, I called David's office, pretending to be a prospective client interested in real estate. It wasn't hard to set up a meeting. Men like him were always eager to close a deal, especially when it involved money. 2 days later, I sat across from him in his sleek, high-rise office. He was every bit as smug and polished as I'd imagined. Designer suit, expensive watch, and a cocky grin that made my skin crawl. "Chris, right?" he said, extending his hand. "That's me," I said, shaking it. His grip was firm, and I fought the urge to squeeze harder than necessary. We exchanged pleasantries before he launched into his sales pitch, showing me properties on his tablet and talking about investment opportunities. I let him go on for about 10 minutes before cutting him off. "Actually, David," I said, leaning back in my chair, "I'm not really here to talk about real estate." He frowned, confused. "Then what are you here for?" I pulled out my phone and slid it across the desk. On the screen was a still image from one of the videos, a clear shot of him and Jessica in my basement. David froze. His face went pale, and his confident smirk vanished. "What the hell is this?" he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. "You tell me?" I said, keeping my tone cold and steady. "Looks like you've been busy. Does your wife know about this? Or your kids?" He stared at the screen, then back at me. You don't understand." "Oh, I understand perfectly," I snapped, cutting him off. "You've been screwing my wife in my house. And from what I've seen, this isn't exactly a one-time thing, is it?" David's hands trembled as he tried to compose himself. "Listen, man, this isn't what you think. It's exactly what I think," I said, leaning forward. "And here's the deal, you're going to tell me everything. How long this has been going on, who else is involved, and what the hell this group is really about. If you don't, I'll make sure your wife, your kids, and everyone in your precious circle know exactly what you've been up to." He looked like he might throw up. "Please," he said, his voice shaking. "Don't do this. I have a family." "So do I," I snapped. "And you didn't think twice about destroying mine. Start talking." David cracked under pressure faster than I expected. He told me everything. The group, which they called The Circle, wasn't just about hooking up. It was an exclusive, invite-only network of people looking for thrills and secrecy. They held meetups in private locations, warehouses, hotels, even members' homes, and kept everything organized through encrypted messaging apps. Jessica had been part of it for over a year, and David admitted she was one of the most active members. She wasn't just participating. She was coordinating events, bringing in new members, and acting as a liaison between them. She's good at this," David said reluctantly. "Everyone trusts her. She knows how to keep things under control." I clenched my fists under the table. "Under control? She's been using my house, David." "How many times?" He hesitated. "A few. I didn't know it was without your permission." I let out a bitter laugh. "Of course you didn't." David also gave me the names of other key members in the circle, along with details about their next big event. A private party happening in a rented mansion next weekend. "Please," he begged as I stood to leave, "don't tell my wife. I'll do whatever you want." "You'll keep your mouth shut," I said coldly. "And if you so much as breathe near Jessica again, I'll burn your entire life to the ground." He nodded, his face pale and drenched in sweat. When I got home, I felt a twisted sense of satisfaction. I now had a list of names, a location for their next meetup, and enough dirt to blow this entire operation wide open. Jessica was in the kitchen when I walked in, humming to herself as she cooked dinner. She greeted me with a smile, completely unaware of the storm brewing just beneath the surface. "How was your day?" she asked, setting a plate in front of me. "It was productive," I said, forcing a smile. She didn't notice the edge in my voice. Over the next few days, I finalized my plan. The party would be the perfect opportunity to expose everything: Jessica's betrayal, the circle's activities, and the twisted network they'd built. I wasn't just going to confront her. I was going to destroy her carefully crafted double life in one fell swoop. The week leading up to the party was excruciating. Every moment I spent with Jessica felt like a lie. She'd kiss me goodbye in the morning, text me sweet nothings during the day, and cuddle up next to me at night. Each gesture made my skin crawl, but I kept my mask on. I needed her to think everything was normal. Meanwhile, I worked with Matt to finalize the plan. The first step was infiltrating the party. Matt suggested I hire a private investigator, but I shot that idea down. I wanted to do this myself. If anyone was going to expose Jessica and the circle, it would be me. We rented equipment, hidden cameras, discreet audio recorders, and a burner phone to use for emergencies. Matt helped me create a fake identity to pose as a new recruit. Using the details David had shared, I reached out to one of the group's organizers and feigned interest in joining. It didn't take long for them to respond. Phoenix, Starfire spoke highly of you. Looking forward to meeting you in person. Event details are below. Discretion is key. The message included the address of the mansion, a password to get in, and a reminder to bring something to share. I didn't know what that meant, and I didn't care. I had my way in. When the night finally arrived, I told Jessica I'd be working late. She barely looked up from her phone. "That's fine," she said. "I've got my book club tonight." I smiled tightly, knowing exactly where she was headed. By 8 p.m., I was parked a block away from the mansion. The property was enormous, surrounded by high walls and a wrought iron gate. Expensive cars lined the driveway, and the faint thump of music echoed through the trees. I adjusted the hidden camera pin to my jacket and walked toward the entrance. Two men in suits stood by the gate, checking guests as they arrived. "Password?" one of them asked. "Eclipse," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He nodded and let me through. Inside, the atmosphere was electric. The mansion was decked out like a nightclub, with dim lighting, loud music, and an open bar. Groups of people mingled in every corner, laughing and chatting like old friends. I scanned the crowd, my heart pounding. Jessica wasn't in the main room, but I knew she had to be here. I made my way through the crowd, pretending to blend in. The camera recorded everything. The faces, the conversations, the subtle touches exchanged between strangers. It didn't take long to find the group's core members, including David, who was nursing a drink in the corner. I spotted Jessica about 20 minutes later. She was in a side room, laughing with a small group of people. She looked radiant, her hair styled and her dress hugging her figure. It was a version of her I hadn't seen in years, and it made my stomach churn. She didn't see me. Not yet. I stayed in the shadows, recording as much as I could. The conversations I overheard were damning, discussions about secret rendezvous, strategies for hiding the group's activities, and plans for future meetups. Then, Jessica's voice cut through the noise. "We've got a great setup here," she said, raising her glass. "And no one suspects a thing." The group laughed and clinked their glasses. My blood boiled, but I kept my composure. Around midnight, I slipped out of the mansion and called Matt. "I've got everything," I said. "It's all on tape. Jessica, David, the group, the whole operation." "Good," Matt replied. "Now what?" "Now," I said, my voice cold, "we take them down." The next morning, I emailed the recordings to my lawyer, along with a detailed timeline of Jessica's activities. I also sent copies to David's wife and a few of the other spouses I'd identified through the group's messages. Within hours, the fallout began. David's wife called me in tears, thanking me for telling her the truth. Other spouses responded with shock and anger, vowing to confront their partners. The group's web of secrets was unraveling, and Jessica had no idea. When she came home that evening, I was waiting for her in the living room. "Hey," she said, setting her purse down. "What's up?" I didn't say a word. Instead, I opened my laptop and hit play. The video of her at the party filled the screen, her voice clear as day. "We've got a great setup here, and no one suspects a thing." Jessica froze, her face draining of color. "Chris," she stammered, "I can explain." "Don't bother," I said, my voice sharp. "It's over, Jessica. I know everything." Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. "This is just the beginning," I said, standing. "You're going to lose everything. Your reputation, your friends, your comfortable little life. And you have no one to blame but yourself." For the first time, Jessica looked truly afraid. Jessica stood frozen, her face pale as the video played on. Her carefully curated mask of confidence was gone, replaced with raw panic. "Chris?" she started again, her voice trembling. "Please let me explain." "Explain what?" I cut her off, my tone cold and sharp. "That you've been running a secret sex ring out of our house? That you've lied to me for years? That you turned our marriage into a complete joke?" Tears welled up in her eyes, but I wasn't moved. I'd spent the last week in agony, uncovering every dirty secret she'd tried to bury. Now it was her turn to feel the weight of it. "I never meant for it to get this far," she said, her voice barely a whisper. I let out a bitter laugh. "Oh, it just accidentally happened? Hosting orgies in our basement, sneaking off to hotels, lying to my face. All by mistake." "It wasn't like that," she pleaded, stepping closer. "I felt trapped, Chris. You were always so busy with work, and I needed. Don't you dare blame this on me," I snapped, taking a step back. "I worked my ass off to give us a good life. I trusted you, and this is how you repay me." She started sobbing, her hands trembling as she tried to reach for me.
I'm sorry.
"I'm so sorry. Please, Chris, we can fix this. I'll leave the circle, I swear. I'll do whatever it takes." But her tears didn't faze me. I'd seen too much, heard too much. There was no coming back from this. "It's too late," I said, my voice steady. "I've already filed for divorce. And trust me, Jessica, you're not walking away from this unscathed." Her eyes widened in shock. You already filed?" I nodded. "And I've sent everything to the lawyer, your texts, your videos, your little meetups. David's wife knows, and so do a few others. By the time I'm done, the circle will be nothing but a pile of ashes." She crumpled onto the couch, her sobs turning into gasps. For the first time, she seemed to understand the gravity of what she'd done. "You can't do this," she whispered. "It'll ruin me." "You ruined yourself," I said coldly. "And now you'll face the consequences." Over the next few days, the fallout from my actions spread like wildfire. David's wife, furious and armed with the evidence I'd sent her, filed for divorce. A few other spouses followed suit. Word of the circle's existence began to leak, sparking whispers and rumors across the neighborhood. Jessica moved out of the house shortly after our confrontation. I didn't care where she went. I was too busy working with my lawyer to finalize the divorce and ensure she got as little as possible. The group's activities caught the attention of local law enforcement when one of the disgruntled spouses filed a complaint. Officers raided the mansion where the last party had taken place, seizing records and equipment that tied several members to illegal activities. Jessica tried reaching out to me multiple times, leaving voicemails and sending emails begging for forgiveness. I deleted every one of them without listening. She'd made her bed. Now she could lie in it. The final blow came 2 weeks later. Using the recordings I'd gathered, I anonymously tipped off a local journalist who specialized in investigative pieces. The story broke online, exposing the circle and its members. Faces were blurred, but enough details were included to make it clear who was involved. Jessica's name wasn't mentioned outright, but anyone who knew her could put 2 and 2 together. Her phone number was flooded with calls, and her social media accounts were bombarded with comments. She disappeared from public view shortly after, and I didn't hear from her again. It wasn't easy to rebuild after everything. The betrayal had cut deep, and there were nights when the anger and sadness felt unbearable. But I refused to let it define me. I sold the house, moved to a new city, and started fresh. Matt stayed in touch, supporting me through the toughest moments. I even began dating again, though it took time to trust someone new. Looking back, I realized the betrayal taught me something invaluable. Never ignore the warning signs, and never let someone rob you of your self-worth. As for Jessica, I don't know where she ended up, and I don't care. She made her choices, and she paid the price. My advice to anyone reading this? If your gut tells you something's wrong, trust it. And when betrayal comes knocking, don't let it break you. Turn it into fuel for your comeback. A month after Jessica disappeared from my life, I thought the chaos was finally behind me. The divorce proceedings were moving forward smoothly, Thanks to the mountain of evidence I'd handed over to my lawyer. The circle had crumbled, its members exposed and humiliated. I was slowly piecing my life back together, trying to focus on the future instead of the past. But then, something unexpected happened. One evening, as I was sorting through some boxes in my new apartment, my phone buzzed. It was an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line read, "You don't know the full story." I hesitated, my finger hovering over the screen. Part of me wanted to delete it without reading. I didn't want to get sucked back into the mess I'd worked so hard to escape. But curiosity got the better of me and I opened it. The email was short but chilling. "Chris, you think you've exposed everything, but there's more going on than you realize. Jessica wasn't just cheating. She was working with someone dangerous. The man you know as David isn't who he says he is. Be careful. They're watching you." There was no name, no signature, just a single attachment. I opened the file and my heart nearly stopped. It was a photo of Jessica and David standing together outside a building I didn't recognize. But they weren't alone. A third man stood between them, his face partially obscured. He was older, wearing a tailored suit and sunglasses, with an air of authority that made my skin crawl. Who was this man? And what did he have to do with Jessica and David? The email threw me into a new spiral of questions. I forwarded it to Matt immediately, along with the photo. "Do you recognize this guy?" I asked when he called me back. "No," Matt said, his voice tense. "But he doesn't look like someone you want to mess with. You think this is legit?" "I don't know," I admitted. "But if there's more to this, I need to find out." Over the next few days, I dug deeper into David's background. What I discovered left me shaken. David wasn't just a real estate developer. He had connections to organized crime, a network of shady deals and offshore accounts that made it clear he wasn't the polished businessman he pretended to be. And Jessica? She wasn't just cheating with him. She'd been helping him. Emails I found on her burner phone revealed that she'd been coordinating more than just illicit meetups. She'd been facilitating transactions, setting up fake events, and even laundering money through the circle's activities. This wasn't just a betrayal. It was a full-blown criminal operation. As I uncovered more, the warnings from the email started to feel real. I began noticing strange things. Cars parked outside my apartment for hours, unfamiliar faces lingering near my building. At first, I thought I was being paranoid, but then Matt called with news that confirmed my fears. "Someone broke into my place last night," he said. "They didn't take anything, but my laptop was open and files were moved around." My blood ran cold. "You think it's connected to this?" "It has to be," he said. "Be careful, Chris. Whoever these people are, they're not playing games." I knew I couldn't let this go. If Jessica and David were involved in something bigger, I needed to bring it to light. But I also needed to protect myself. I contacted the private investigator Matt had suggested weeks ago, finally admitting I needed help. Together, we pieced together the connections between Jessica, David, and the man in the photo. The investigator confirmed my suspicions. The older man was a high-ranking figure in a local crime syndicate. He'd been using David's real estate business as a front for illegal activities, and Jessica had been a key player in their operations. I realized then that exposing Jessica and the circle had only been the tip of the iceberg. I'd stumbled into something far more dangerous than I'd imagined. With the new information in hand, I had a choice to make. Go to the authorities and risk drawing more attention, or walk away and hope the storm passed. But walking away wasn't an option. Jessica had destroyed my life, and now she was part of something that could destroy others. I wasn't going to let her or David get away with it. "This ends now," I told Matt during our next call. "You sure about this?" he asked. "I'm sure," I said, my voice firm. I didn't know how this would play out, but one thing was certain. I wasn't going to back down. The private investigator provided me with a detailed report tying David and Jessica to the syndicate's operations. Fake charity events, money laundering, and secret meetings, it was all laid out. I forwarded the report to law enforcement through an anonymous tip line. My goal was simple. Get this operation under investigation without letting them know I was involved. 2 days later, news broke. A police raid on one of David's properties exposed fraudulent dealings and a trove of incriminating documents. David was arrested. Jessica was next. After David's arrest, Jessica vanished. She didn't show up for her scheduled divorce hearing, and her phone went dead. Matt called me with an update. "She's probably hiding, Chris. The people she worked for won't take this lightly." I wasn't sure whether to feel relief or dread. Jessica's disappearance didn't bring closure. It opened a door to something darker. A black SUV started appearing outside my apartment at night. It didn't move, didn't leave, and no one got out. I called the private investigator. "You're being watched," he confirmed. "Stay out of sight. These people don't leave loose ends." I knew the syndicate had noticed me. Despite the threats, I kept gathering evidence. I sent copies to multiple investigators and legal authorities, ensuring there were too many eyes on this for the syndicate to cover up. The circle's remnants crumbled. Key members were outed, and the group was publicly dismantled. Jessica's involvement became undeniable, and her name spread like wildfire through the scandal. Weeks later, I got a call from the private investigator. "Jessica turned herself in," he said. "She's cooperating with the authorities. Looks like she's trying to cut a deal." Hearing her name brought no emotion. She'd lost everything, and I was finally free from her lies. Months passed, and life began to stabilize. I moved to a new city, started a new job, and began rebuilding. Jessica's betrayal taught me resilience, but I'd learned to let go of the anger. My advice? When betrayal comes, face it head on. The truth might hurt, but it's the only path to freedom.